In the Golden Age of sail, it was a world of myth, of treasure, and of rebellion, but beneath the Jolly Roger's grin lay a truth written in blood. This was a society forged in defiance, a floating republic of outcasts. But their freedom was a fragile, brutal thing, maintained not by laws of kings, but by a savage justice of their own making. For every piece of gold, a price was paid. For every act of defiance against the crown, a steeper price was demanded from within. The greatest threat on a pirate ship was not the Royal Navy, it was the man standing next to you. They called it the Pirate's Code. It was less a document of rights and more a pact for survival, a grim ledger where every crime was listed, and every punishment was absolute. Forget treasure maps and swashbuckling heroes. This is the story of the dark reality that governed their world. This is the story of pirate punishment. The romantic image of the pirate is a powerful one, a liberator, an adventurer, a rogue. But this is a carefully constructed fiction, a story told to hide the abject horror of their existence. Life at sea was a relentless trial. It was months of boredom and squalor, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. In this crucible, resentments festered like gangrene. Order had to be maintained. With no courts, no judges, and no king's law, the pirates turned to a system they all understood: fear. Their laws were simple, their justice swift. This was the paradox of the pirate republic. To guarantee that the freedom they so desperately craved, they submitted to a code more draconian than any they had fled. Before any voyage, the Articles of Agreement were drawn up. Every man who signed, or made his mark, was bound by them, on pain of death. These articles dictated everything. They outlined the shares of plunder, compensation for injuries, and the rules of engagement. Most importantly, they outlined the consequences of breaking faith. Fair shares were the bedrock of this society. A captain might receive 2 shares, a quartermaster 1.5. But every man was guaranteed his portion, a stark contrast to the navies they deserted. Even injury was accounted for, a brutally pragmatic form of insurance. The loss of a right arm was worth 600 pieces of 8. An eye, 100. Every wound had its price. But this fragile democracy was built upon a foundation of absolute terror. The punishments were not merely deterrents, they were theatrical displays of cruelty, designed to sear themselves into the memory of the crew. The code was the beast they had created to tame themselves. And now, they had to feed it. Let us begin with the lesser sins, and the lesser agonies. Disputes between men were inevitable in such close quarters. To prevent brawls from escalating into mutinous chaos, the code prescribed a formal, lethal solution: the duel. Often called a pistoling, it was a grimly civilized affair. The quartermaster would oversee the duel, ensuring the rules were followed. The verdict was delivered by a lead ball. For lesser crimes, laziness, minor dereliction of duty, or petty squabbles, the punishment was often flogging. The instrument of this discipline was the infamous cat o' nine tails. Each lash of the cat could strip flesh from bone. The number of lashes was prescribed by the captain or quartermaster, a public and brutal reinforcement of the ship's hierarchy. The scars from a flogging were known as a captain's tiger. A man who wore them was marked forever, a walking testament to the ship's brutal order. Another punishment was known as sweating. The offender was forced to run endlessly around the main mast while other crewmen poked and stabbed at him with sharp tools. The torment would continue until the man collapsed from exhaustion or his wounds. It was a punishment designed not just to harm, but to utterly humiliate. Sometimes, the punishment was more subtle, but no less severe. A man found guilty of cheating at cards or dice might have his ration of rum cut, a fate worse than a beating to many. This was economic warfare on a micro scale. In a world where plunder was everything, being denied your full share was a public declaration of your worthlessness to the crew. But there were crimes that went far beyond petty theft or insubordination. There were sins that struck at the very heart of the pirate brotherhood. The greatest of these was betraying your brother. Stealing from a fellow crewmate was not just theft, it was treason against their fragile society. The punishment for such a crime was almost universally the same, a sentence of profound and terrifying isolation. The thief would be marooned. Another unforgivable sin was cowardice in the face of the enemy. A man who would not fight endangered every soul on the ship. His fear was a contagion that had to be purged. The punishment was often a swift, brutal execution on the spot. But sometimes, a more theatrical sentence was pronounced: the coward would be forced to walk the plank. While largely a creation of 19th century fiction, the principle was real. A disgraced pirate was a dead man. Whether by plank, pistol, or simply being thrown to the sharks, the result was the same. But of all the crimes, the most dangerous was mutiny. To challenge the captain was to challenge the very structure of their world, to invite anarchy and ruin. If a mutiny failed, the fate of its ringleaders was sealed. There was no mercy for those who broke the chain of command. Their punishment had to be the most severe of all. They would often be hanged from the yardarm, a punishment borrowed from the very navies they despised. It was the ultimate irony, the rebel, executed by the symbol of absolute authority. These were the high crimes of the pirate world. The punishments were not just retribution, they were a form of psychological warfare, a constant, brutal reminder of the thin line between freedom and death. Now we descend into the deepest circles of this maritime hell. We explore the punishments whose names have become legends, whispered in taverns and sailors' nightmares for centuries. Consider the fate of being marooned. It was a sentence of slow, creeping madness, a death sentence delivered by the sun, the salt, and the crushing weight of solitude. The victim was left with a few meager supplies. A flask of water, a small amount of gunpowder, and a single pistol, loaded with one shot. This single shot was not an act of mercy. It was the ultimate psychological torment, a choice between a quick end and the faint, vanishing hope of rescue. Most would succumb to thirst or madness, their final days spent scratching messages in the sand for the waves to wash away. Their stories, and their bones, were lost to the tides. The tale of Alexander Selkirk, the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe, is the rare exception. For most, the island was not a challenge to be overcome, but an open grave. And what of walking the plank? As we've seen, it was rare. The reality was often far less ceremonial and far more brutal. Pirates were practical men. A plank took time to set up. A sword in the gut and a heave-ho was far more efficient. The legend of the plank persists because it offers a narrative, a ritual. The truth is that pirate justice was often just chaotic, bloody murder. But there was one punishment, so vile, so feared, that its name alone could quell a mutiny. It was a horror born of the ship itself. It was called keel hauling. The condemned was tied to a rope, looped from one side of the ship to the other, passing beneath the hull. He was then thrown overboard from one side, while the crew on the other side pulled on the rope, dragging him down, under the ship, and up the other side. If he was lucky. The barnacles and sharp mollusks that encrusted the keel would act like a giant cheese grater, shredding the victim's body from head to toe. Survival was unlikely. If the lacerations and blood loss didn't kill you, drowning would. The speed of the pull determined the agony. Too slow, you'd drown. Too fast, you'd be torn to ribbons. Keel hauling was the ultimate expression of the ship's power over the individual. The vessel itself, their home and their livelihood, became the instrument of torture and execution. This was not justice. This was a ritual of terror, a message to all who sailed under the black flag: the crew is everything, and the individual is nothing. Finally, there was the punishment of being hanged from the yardarm. While often a Navy practice, some pirates, particularly those mimicking military structure like Black Bart Roberts, adopted it. Unlike the chaotic brutality of keel hauling, the hanging was a cold, formal affair. It was a declaration that the captain's authority was as absolute as any king's. The body would often be left to hang for days, a gruesome warning to any other would-be mutineers, and a chilling spectacle for any ship that passed by. These punishments, marooning, keel hauling, hanging, formed the dark trinity of pirate justice. They were born of desperation, in a world without law, without sanctuary, without hope of appeal. So why? Why create a system of such elaborate and grotesque cruelty? The answer lies not in sadism, but in the cold, hard calculus of survival. A pirate ship was a pressure cooker of violence and greed. It was a small, isolated society of traumatized and dangerous men, thousands of miles from any form of authority. The slightest breakdown in discipline, a stolen coin, a drunken insult, a moment of cowardice, could cascade into a bloody free-for-all, sinking the entire enterprise. The pirate code, and its brutal punishments, was the only thing holding this chaos at bay. It was a firewall built of terror. The punishments were public theater. The screams of the flogged, the bloated corpse on the yardarm, the tale of the man left on the barren rock, these were lessons for the living. This system wasn't about right and wrong. It was a cold, pragmatic algorithm for group survival. In their world, justice was not a virtue, it was a tool. The men who enforced this code, the captains and quartermasters, were not necessarily monsters. They were pragmatists, forced to make terrible choices to hold their violent world together. They had to be harder, crueler, and more ruthless than any man who might challenge them. Their authority was bought with the currency of fear. And so, the Golden Age of Piracy, that brief, fiery explosion of rebellion, burned itself out. It was a society too violent, too unstable to last. The very brutality that allowed them to exist also ensured their demise. They were a short-lived, bloody footnote in the grand, cruel sweep of history. When we look back, we are seduced by the myth, the freedom, the treasure, the rebellion. But we forget the cost. We forget the screams swallowed by the sea. The reality of pirate justice was not the stuff of adventure. It was a desperate, bloody pact made by doomed men on the edge of the world. Their code was not a noble experiment in democracy. It was the shriek of humanity pushed to its absolute limit, a testament to the darkness that lies within us all, waiting for the rule of law to fail.